So Adobe has two apps that you can use for illustration. One is Adobe Illustrator and the other is Adobe Photoshop. And we're going to compare and contrast them a little bit right now. We're going to talk about some of the similarities, some of the differences, and how you would know which one to choose when you're starting to draw your illustration. So let's first talk about some similarities. As you can see, are set up very similarly. Um, let's start with Adobe Photoshop. You have a toolbar full of different tools that you can use. The next thing is you have, when you have a Photoshop activated, you have a menu bar. This menu bar has a drop-down menu that gives you lots of different options. On the side, there are panels. These panels give you things that you can adjust in your document. And then there's a control bar across the top, depending on whether or not you turn this control bar on or off. And then you have your artboard. Let's gonna go over to Adobe Illustrator, and you're gonna see the setup, the workspace is very similar. It has a toolbar. If I make sure I have Illustrator activated, and again, it has a menu bar where you can choose lots of different things and how to change different things. You have a control bar that controls what you're working on, and you have panels. Sometimes, as you can see, that some of the icons in the toolbars are the same icons, even if they might be in different locations. If I wanted to draw a rectangle in Photoshop, I could find the rectangle tool right here, and I could draw a rectangle. I could click and hold it and change that to an ellipse to draw a circle. Similarly, in Illustrator, if I wanted to draw a rectangle, I would have to find the rectangle tool. It's not in the same location. Illustrator, it's up here. I could draw a rectangle. Try to change it to a color so it's easier to see. Or I could draw, use the ellipse tool to draw a circle. Now, as you see, the up in the control bar, has some of the same options. What the shape is filled with, what color the shape is on the outside of the shape, which is the stroke, and how thick that stroke is. Let's see, and some of the other aspects. Also, some of the panels are very similar. The panels have the ability to tell you what size the shape that you're dealing with is, has what rotation it is. You can see as I scroll through, even some of the other options like the Pathfinder are similar. The color panel they both have a color panel, they both have a gradient panel, they both have layers. Now, those are all some of the similarities between the two programs, Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop. So now let's talk about some of the differences between the two programs. So let's first talk about Photoshop. I'm going to condense Illustrator and expand Photoshop. Photoshop's primary thing is it creates and edits pixels. What are pixels? If you're not familiar with them, I'm going to start to zoom in. Pixels are little squares that make up an image. Sometimes they're easy to see. As you can see, the circle has a curve to it, so it's very easy to see the squares that make it up. The rectangle is rectangle. You can't see the squares until you start to rotate it. Then you can start to see the squares that make up. Now, you can't always see those because we're zoomed in, but as I zoom out, you might be, even zoomed out, Photoshop is still using pixels to make all the information. Now, let's go to Adobe Illustrator. You'll notice that no matter how much I zoom in, I am never going to see pixels that make up this shape, this circle, because this circle isn't being made up by pixels. This circle, I'm going to zoom back out a little bit, is being made up by vectors. What are vectors? Vectors are shapes that are built on points, anchor points, and paths. As you can see from this right here, there's an anchor point here, it has a mathematical curve, and that is how Adobe Illustrator is creating this shape by using mathematical algorithms to draw different curves and knowing how to curve each of these paths to connect to the next anchor point. The same thing with the rectangle. Now, this is an illustration of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and I'm going to go into outline mode Adobe Illustrator. You can see that it was built the exact same way as the circle and square, with all of anchor points and paths that connect the anchor points. The nice thing about Adobe Illustrator is because it is opening things with all these paths and anchor points, it's going to be very easy to move things around inside. So if I start to grab any, let's see, let's go out so we can see. So if I need to if I ungroup all these different elements, you can see that I can move each of these elements around. I can even go inside the group and maybe even move smaller pieces of each of these around. But see that because they're all made with individual paths, you can edit these paths and move pieces around, possibly delete them altogether, and everything seems to come out. It's very easy to make those edits to this Adobe Illustrator vector document. I'll open up the same illustration in Photoshop that was built by somebody else. And this is the same Eiffel Tower. As I start to zoom in, you can see the pixels that it's made out of. It was all built on one layer, similar to what was built in Illustrator, but it's all a flat image. So I can't move pieces around because it's all the same thing. Let's see. I start to move it. Oh, it's all one piece. It's all one piece together. I can't go into outline, showing the outlines of this in Photoshop because there are no outlines, there are no shapes that are being used to build it. It is being built with pixels. So really the best I can do to kind of show you is, again, just to zoom in until you can see the pixels, but it's all one piece. So it's, when you're dealing with the illustrations, it's all usually much easier to edit them inside of Adobe Illustrator because you still have the individual shapes that make up the illustration. So one of these programs, I'm going to try to open them both up at the same time, are scalable and one is not. One is, because it's built on shapes, is much easier to take those shapes and build them in the real world rather than and one takes, and in certain situations one might take up more or less space on your computer servers than the other. So scalability, so let's talk about that first. So I take this image and I shrink it down completely. And now I zoom in on it. You can see that none of the information of this image has been lost. So it still has, if I can, it still has, at this size, which is very, very small, I'm going to zoom back out, it still has all the information it does at this size as it did when this image was very big. So this image can scale up and down infinitely and not lose any information. Remember, I'm in Adobe Illustrator dealing with those mathematical algorithms called vectors. Now let's think about Adobe Photoshop. So I'm going to take this image and I'm going to resize it, go to image size, and instead of being 28 inches, I'm going to make it 1 inch. Let's make it half an inch. Make it about as big as I did on the other program. And as I start to zoom in on it, you might notice that a lot of the information of this one got lost because the size of the pixels are only so big. So when I shrink it down, all of that information is gone. If I went in reverse and made it back to the size it was before, image size, now I'm going to go to back up to 28 inches. see that all that information that I did before was kind of lost by shrinking it. The information disappears. I expand it. I guess the amount of information is still there, but the kind of information is different. Instead of having many little dots that are different colors, now it has lots of dots, less variety of colors. So it still has more squares, more pixels, but those pixels are all the same color, so it really doesn't matter. All that information is now gone. So scalability, Adobe Illustrator kind of wins in that thing, that it can scale up and down. Now imagine that I was going to send either one of these to someone to cut out of, let's say, a laser cutter, or cut it out of vinyl to become a sticker that's going to go on outside a vehicle, or it's going to be printed out of a 3D printer. The one that when you're dealing with pixel images, it becomes very hard for computers to tell exactly where it should cut, where the shape should be drawn when it's looking at pixels. Now, I'm going to compare that to Adobe Illustrator. Okay. I'm going to make this bigger again so I don't have to zoom in quite so much as we're talking about it. So if I'm sending this to a computer to cut out this shape, you can see that it is going to know exactly what shape to cut out. Again, this is a mathematical vector, so it knows exactly where to turn, where to go. Same thing with the laser cutter. Same thing with something that's going to be cut out, 3D printed. The vectors are the way to go when you're doing anything that's going to be made into something that's actually going to be in the real world. Now, the last thing that really goes into which program you might choose is which one takes up more space. Which one are you going to save space on your computer or on a computer network that you're having to use? So let's look at the two files separately, and let's make that determination. So in Photoshop, we're going to reopen the, I kind of got rid of the one that I messed up. So we're back to the original Eiffel Tower illustration. We've got that open in Photoshop, and I'm going to save this as a Photoshop document. And then in Illustrator, I'm going to save the Eiffel Tower illustration as an Illustrator document. I've also saved just the simple rectangle and circles now in both programs. So as I look at the Photoshop, just the rectangle and the circle, I'm going to, let's look at how big that file is. So I'm going to right click on the file and choose Get Info. And it tells me it is 150 kilobytes. Kilobytes are very, very small. It's a very small file. It's not surprising because it doesn't have that much information in it. And if I look at this, this same file or the same kinds of shapes in Illustrator, right click on it, go to Get Info. It's actually a slightly larger file, you see there. But when we get to the Paris illustration, but they're close. So that's 1.5, but both are in the kilobytes, which is all very small files. But if we get to the Paris illustration and I open that up in Illustrator, and now it is obviously a lot bigger. It's 3 times the size. You can see it's got 600 kilobytes. But when I look at the Photoshop file, we've now gone to 1.9 megabytes, which is over 1 million compared to about 600,000. So this Photoshop file actually has a lot more information in it. It's taken up a lot more computer space on my server than the Illustrator, even though when I look at it, the Illustrator file almost has more, I can zoom in and see those crisp lines, where again, if I did the same thing to the Photoshop file, I would start to see the pixels that make it up. And that's part of why there's more information here, is that there's a jagged line, or jagged squares that creating this angle, whereas in Illustrator, that's all just one algorithm, one vector right here. There's just a vector going in a direction. So it doesn't need as much information to recreate this. It's creating it more smoothly, it's creating it crisper, but it's having less information to create that crisp line.